조던 피터슨이 무신론자 소년을
You're
칭찬합니다.
really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a
Okay,
Christian.
I'm done with him.
이게 도대체 무슨 일일까? 조던 피터슨이 수많은 무신론자들에게 둘러싸이게 됩니다. 먼저는 예의 바른 무신론자
Nice to
청년.
meet you,
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it. No more than I'm rejecting
Do you believe in
anything
Lono?
that I don't know anything
Do you
about.
believe in Lono?
I
Do you
fail to
believe
see
that
the
he is a
relevance of
deity
that.
that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid, then there's no point in...
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Do
mean
you
it's
believe-
formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject it. Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your
Answer that
argument
question.
to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth, where if you don't understand what you're rejecting the belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your
I
claim.
didn't say that I rejected the belief in Lono. I said
it's
I didn't
Lono.
know who Lono was. I didn't
Right.
say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't, but let me get to my even greater point.
There, you've been voted out by the
결국
majority.
쓸쓸히 퇴장하고 말죠.
So I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way, but
What literal way?
the way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you
like,
think that there's an underlying unity of things?
could you explain that question?
Scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or
I
that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
I'm trying to define God, the God
Yeah.
that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All
you a
right.
very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you can imagine
Infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and What are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Conscience is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity. And then that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this is kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah defined
Okay, so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also defined it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old
Okay.
Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God, and that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how do we
statement.
specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or we again. It goes back to my example of the
I'm
Mona Lisa.
defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay, so-
in Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure. So whoever. So some.
It's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay.
major
All right.
Old Testament
All right.
prophets.
All
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't
Right, but
understand what they're rejecting.
you're
You
being-
accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because again,
I asked you if you believe that
you-
conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not
and
in
then
the
you're-
least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend
Which
to use
point?
these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of
point.
God.
You did.
I did. Well, I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you. I
nice to
appreciate
meet
the
you too.
conversation.
Yeah, it's very brave of you to do this.
여기서 양심과 도덕에 대해 조던 피터슨이 조금 더 깊이 파고들 지점이 있었는데 짧은 시간 안에 그리고 무엇보다 여러 언어적 공격을 당해온 그가 이번엔 조금 더 방어적으로 나오는 탓에 토론의 깊이가 다소 떨어지는 인상을 받게 됩니다. 조던 피터슨을 오래 지켜본 사람이라면 그가 믿음을 특정한 정체성으로 앞세우기보다는 행동과 그 결과 곧 열매로 나타나는 삶에 더 집중한다는 점을 알 수 있죠. 이처럼 피터슨은 일반적인 기독교인의 입장이라기보다 실존주의적 관점에서 자신의 스탠스를 보여왔습니다. 이 때문에 최기획이었던 기독교 한명대 무신론자 20명이라는 구도도 영상에 공개된 뒤 얼마 지나지 않아 조던 피터슨 대 무신론자 20명으로 바뀌게 된
You
것이죠.
say atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay, do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay, so do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But you would
place.
put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
what do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall. did I? I didn't add that to my definition.
You understand.
I said there was a hierarchy.
You attend a
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
And now you're adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition...
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you familiar?
just didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
How do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either you're a
'cause
Christian
I won't
or you're
talk
not.
to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
게다가 이번 토론에서는 가톨릭의 다양한 교리와 전통 그리고 문화적 요소들도 몇 차례나 도마에 올랐습니다. 이 과정에서 기독교 신앙의 본질적 영성보다는 가톨릭 특유의 정체성이나 문화적 문제점에 대한 비판이 더욱 부각되었죠. 그 결과 토론의 핵심이 점차 흐려지며 전체 논의의 방향성도 크게 흔들려 버렸습니다. 이 토론은 결국 주블리라는 스튜디오 채널 역사상 손에 꼽힐 만한 실패한 토론으로 평가받게 되었는데 그 배경에는 주던 피터슨이 일반적으로 사람들이 기대하는 기독교인이라는 명확한 정체성이나 신앙 고백 대신 보다 철학적이고 실존적인 관점으로 대응했다는 점이 있었습니다. 바로 이런 이유로 토론은 신학적 깊이나 영적 본질에는 이르지 못한 채 결국 표면적인 혹은 전제와 정의에 관한 논쟁에만 머무르게 된 것입니다. 하지만 바로 다음 순간 예상치 못한 흥미로운 전개가 펼쳐집니다.
God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy and Numbers and in Samuel. I mean, they have a God nice baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
The biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think that
no,
if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking
How
about
do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So-
How do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, but sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you mean by an absurdity. What game are you playing with
Well,
that
I just think
question?
that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics, that like the Christian
I
God
didn't
isn't
say
like
that.
Christian
I
ethical.
said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through
Thank
the
you.
example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but
And-
this
and-
one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's
well-
what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God
Do you
saying,
think that
go
there's
and
ever
do this
such a thing?
atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right, fair
Yeah,
enough.
but
I
this
mean,
one
people-
certainly wasn't a just war. The context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the God. And then 400 years later, commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but
Absolutely not.
Yep.
The genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who was sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. belief. That's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm
Okay.
addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great and all like
I think
the
it's a
great making
definition.
qualities.
Sure.
Yeah,
By
like
definition.
flawless. Yeah. So,
Okay, so
does a
wait a
flawless
sec,
thing
wait a
change?
sec.
Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell
so
the truth.
does-
That's one.
That's totally fine, but
No.
presumably
You don't get to skate over
because
that.
this is a straw man.
That's totally
It's
fine.
a straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So
In
the
what way?
argument
No,
is
wait,
that God,
wait a sec. You
Well, I'm already
said
waiting a second.
find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't
and
say any
just
of
did.
those words. I'm not sure what
Hey,
conversation you're
rephrase
a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly.
Okay.
Okay. Rephrase your question so that because I must have missed it. I tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral,
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
our understanding might, but
Okay, how
presumably
do we
what the perfect being is revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between whether...
Between our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself.
Between our
we can only
Presumably
see
a
through our
perfect
own
being-
lenses.
Presumably a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time
how does
is
something-
revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect
Sure.
and complete.
Sure.
Okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that.
Sure.
Well, they're going to get it wrong.
Sure,
Okay,
but
now
what I-
wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
Well, yeah,
perfect
I
in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles, where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
Wait
if
a sec. Wait, let's not go to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix. People like Graham Oppie make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you are going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
you
you
want to
tried
respond
to
to the
make
argument?
Yes, you tried to make a case for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under
Like
your
I said,
view,
if
under
you want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone
So-
like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world,
doesn't mean determined.
it's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it determined.
Causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
Okay.
That's not the case.
사실 조던 피터슨은 이제 전설이 되어버린 수천만 부의 토론, 바로 급진적 페미니스트 앵커 캐시 뉴먼과의 인터뷰, 그리고 곧이어 남편과 이혼하게 된 급진적 페미니스트 기자 헬렌 루이스와의 대담 이후 그야말로 전 세계적으로 엄청난 주목을 받게 되었습니다. 하지만 피터슨은 성격상 이런 대립적인 공개 토론 자체가 그에게 매우 큰 스트레스로 다가온다고 밝혀왔고, 실제로 이번처럼 직접적으로 반대하는 다수와 맞서 토론을 펼친 것은 그에게도 꽤 오랜만의 일이었습니다. 이렇다 보니 토론 과정에서는 다소 예민한 반응과 거친 언어가 오가게 되었고, 또 각자가 사용하는 용어의 전제와 규정이 대화 전반에 걸쳐 계속 충돌하면서 토론이 토론의 퀄리티도 상당히 떨어질 수밖에 없었습니다. 일부에서는 피터슨이 이전만큼의 여유로움을 보이지 못했다는 평가도 있었고 스스로를 크리스천이라고 명확히 밝히지 않는 모습을 두고 슈뢰딩거의 크리스천이라는 별명까지 붙었습니다. 이런 모습은 조던 피터슨 교수가 가진 신앙관이 일반적인 무신론자들이 생각하는 기존 기독교인의 정체성과는 상당히 다르기 때문일지도 모릅니다. 특히 이번 토론에서 마지막 학생이 언급한 끔찍한 학살의 문제, 그리고 모든 시대에 반복되는 악과 고통이라는 질문, 즉 완벽하고 선하신 하나님께서 왜 그런 참혹한 명령을 내리셨으며 어째서 이 세상에 이토록 큰 악과 고통이 존재하도록 허락하시는가. 먼저 이 학살 명령에 대해 클리프 크넥틀리가 입을 엽니다.
I think we've got to read very carefully. First point, do I allow God to judge? In my culture, that's unacceptable. And yet the Bible insists God does have the right to judge. Second point, is exaggeration being used? Is hyperbole being used in a lot of those passages? Yes, it is. Because clearly, obviously, many of those people who were supposedly all wiped out appear in the next book. So you know that they weren't all wiped out. Thirdly, you look at the archaeological evidence for Jericho and Ai, and you begin to realize those were probably smaller fortresses. Yes, Rahab was in there as a but those were not just families and women and children. Those were fortresses that were protecting the families that lived out in the countryside around them. Next point is, I think that there is not the emphasis on individualism in the Old Testament that we have in our culture.
Yep.
And yet, the more we struggle through children of alcoholics and realize that there are real consequences that stretch down through the generations, and I think the Old Testament does present a picture that we are more interconnected than we as American individualists would like to admit. And when God judges a people group, yes, some innocent people are swept along in the judgment, and that bugs me. I don't like that. And yet that is part of, I think, what the Bible is talking about when it says we're created in the image of God, meaning that we do have free will, which means there are consequences to my decisions that affect my children, that affect my grandchildren. We're more interconnected than we would like to admit. So no, those children are not being punished for anything they did wrong, but yes, they're born into a cursed, messed up world, and there are consequences to that. I mean, I benefited from going to Davidson College, and a lot of people sacrificed to put Davidson together. You benefited from going to Oxford University, and there are a lot of people who have over many years given sacrificially to build that. So there are real consequences that stretch down through the generations of our decisions. And also, the Bible never says that those children and all those people go to eternity separate from God. I'm convinced that we will see those children in heaven if they were killed before an age of accountability. So the justice of God will ultimately triumph.
Yeah.
But do I have problems with the text? Yes, of course I have problems with the text. I don't understand it exactly. I don't understand what God is doing exactly there, why he says that kind of thing. But I'm also convinced that hyperbole is being used. And I think that's a very important thing. For instance, when I was in high school, we used to say, we're going to kill the opposing team that we're going to play that weekend. Not meaning we're literally going to kill them. And the whole idea of, in the Hebrew harem, H-E-R-E-M, of clearing out these people from the promised land. The whole idea that God had given them over 400 years to repent, and they had chosen not to, and now God clears them out. I think it's a complex issue, more complex than the person would allow it to be, who just says, I just can't believe that God would do something like that.
Research coming out too on just how bad these people groups really
Sure,
were.
right.
I'm seeing more of this.
Child sacrifice.
Canaanites, exactly. It just gets worse every year. Like, how bad is it going to get? The second one, have you wrestled with this being a really culturally conditioned question? The Chinese don't struggle with this one.
Yeah.
I've talked to people of other cultures, and I've brought it up and been like, that's totally fine that God judges in that kind of way.
But here's another problem. God told Abraham to take Isaac up on Mount Moriah and sacrifice his son. Now, if someone interprets that as being God's laying down wise principles for good parenting, they're an idiot.
Sure, yeah.
That is not what Genesis chapter 2 is communicating. God gave Abraham a very specific command, and it was not to give an example of wise parenting. It was, Abraham, who's number one in your heart? Is it going to be God, or is it going to be your son? Who are you going to build your future on? Your son or me? Similarly, what Israel does there in the Old Testament is not examples of just war theory. No, it is a unique example of God using a theocracy, and we don't live in a theocracy. We don't have a theocracy in Israel now, and we're definitely not a theocracy in the United States or in UK. God using a theocracy to carve out a land that he brings then Messiah into. That's a one-time deed, because you're absolutely right. It is not an example of just war. No way.
Still, eventually, the point is to welcome them in. It's not like they're going to sit in the land flowing with milk and honey forever and again be God's chosen people, and that's it. Secondly, we're reading this again from our 21st century Judeo-Christian lens. So your outrage and indignation over this is entirely Christian. That's why the Bible is self-critiquing, which I love about it. Thirdly, putting to the sword word, even women and children, as messed up as that sounds, many would say that that was actually more gracious in that time period than other civilizations who they're going to the rest of their lives, right? And just horrific things that are unimaginable to us. So that's another really important thing to remember. And then lastly, the one you got to wrestle with is, okay, so in an ancient Near Eastern culture, you're looking for God to act in a very humane kind of way. All right, to what extent? And what extent does free will come into play as well? Not just the evil heart of humankind. But how exactly do you want to play God? Because I want to play God too in those passages, but what does that look like? What specifically does that look like?
It's also kind of difficult to think about Jesus Christ bleeding and dying on a cross to make atonement for human sin. That's kind of repugnant in one sense. So there are a lot of things when it comes to dealing with the problem of sin and the judgment of God that are very difficult. My God, why have you forsaken me? I mean, is that really necessary? Why can't just God wave a wand and say you're all forgiven? Why is the cross so necessary? Is that not morally repugnant in some ways? Well, in some ways, I think it is morally repugnant. And yet that is how God brings justice and mercy together there at the cross. And so yes, God is a God who judges, and I have a problem with his judgment often. I don't like it. And I struggle with the Old Testament wars. I struggle with the cross in terms of Jesus absorbing the hit from my sin. At times I'm like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. Father, if it's possible, take this cup from me, and why shouldn't it be possible? There are a lot of deep questions that I don't have easy answers for, but I think that Job, who we started off with, is quite an example. Though he slay me, yet will I trust in him. I don't understand why he judges the way he does, why he allows certain things to happen exactly the way they happen. I don't understand exactly why Christ had to sacrifice his life on a cross. That was an incredibly painful experience, obviously. And yet I am committed to justice being a real value that flows from the character of God, and the way God dispenses justice is really often outside my understanding at this point.
사실 저도 처음에는 성경 속 이런 구절들을 접할 때마다 흠칫 놀랄 때가 많았습니다. 하지만 인격적인 주님을 만나고 성령의 조명 아래 말씀을 읽게 된 이후로는 이런 명령이 오늘날 우리에게는 주어지지 않는 것이 얼마나 큰 은혜인지 먼저 생각하게 되었죠. 또 한편으로는 우리가 미처 다 알지 못하는 하나님의 경륜과 그 시대적 맥락 속에서 죄를 미워하시는 하나님의 공의로움을 깊이 생각해야만 합니다. 솔직히 지금의 제 신앙 상태로는 주님께서 무엇을 행하시든 그분의 뜻이 곧 진리고 선일 수밖에 없다는 그런 믿음을 갖게 되었죠. 어쩌면 이런 태도가 맹목적인 신앙처럼 보일 수 있지만 결국 하나님은 무른 사랑만을 베푸시거나 임의로 심판하시는 분이 아니라 사랑과 공의를 동시에 이루시는 분임을 말씀을 통해 분명히 알게 됩니다. 특히 죄가 얼마나 끔찍한 것인지, 그리고 죄와 악이 얼마나 쉽게 전염될 수 있는지를 알게 되면 예수님께서 왜 죄를 뿌리채 뽑고 악에서 떠나라고 끊임없이 말씀하시는지 더 깊이 깨달을 수밖에 없습니다. 결국 두렵고 떨리는 마음으로 주님을 의지할 때 진정한 사랑이 무엇인지 조금씩 깨달아가게 됩니다. 세상의 인본주의적 기준이나 공의 없는 따스함에만 머무는 산타 할아버지 같은 사랑이 아니라 오히려 죄를 미워하면서도 끝까지 사랑하시는 하나님의 완전한 사랑과 공의를 조금씩 알아가게 되는 것이죠. 그러나 이제 우리가 진정으로 마주해야 할 마지막 질문은 바로 악과 고통의 문제입니다.
If God is so loving and so powerful, then why do you suffer so much? Why do innocent people get raked over the coals? What's going on? Doesn't God care? Or is he simply too weak to do anything about it? Now, one of the reasons that I think is because of what Pastor Ed and his precious wife Lisa went through in losing their precious daughter in 2021. I mean, you're a pastor. That's not supposed to happen to you and your wife. Well, sorry. All of us suffer. It's part of reality. So why? Why does God allow people to get destroyed by circumstances, by other people? Is God disinterested? First part of the answer is, I do not know. I don't know why God allowed evil and suffering. For thousands of years, philosophers and theologians far more intelligent than me have struggled with that issue, and they've never come up with an ultimate answer. And the Bible does not answer that question ultimately. So I do not know. And I can promise you, in 1997, when I went out to Madison, Wisconsin, where my younger brother, was a transplant surgeon transplanting kidneys and livers, I went out there because his 7-year-old daughter had just been crushed in a car accident to death. And if you think that I'm going to go out, meet my brother who's far more intelligent than I'll ever be, and explain to him why God allowed his 7-year-old daughter to be crushed by a pickup truck coming down the road at 55 miles an hour, why the babysitter didn't see the stop sign, ran the stop sign, and that pickup truck slammed to the side of the car, sending my 7-year-old niece to an early grave, I'm not going to do that, because that'd be lying. I do not know. Why God allowed evil and suffering. Yeah, but come on, Cliff, you gotta think. Well, yeah, we do have to think. You're right. And one of my thoughts on the issue is this, which I think is very biblical. God chose to limit his power by creating us with a free will, which means I can either pull out my wallet and give you money to eat lunch, or I can roll this hand into a fist, send it crashing into your handsome face. I am free to do either. And what the Bible teaches is in Genesis chapter 1, God created us in his image, which means we are not robots, we're not machines. And I like to walk, so if I stumble and fall off of this stage, I'm not going to pick myself up at the bottom and say, phew, I'm glad that's over with. That's determinism. That's fatalism. God creates us in his image, which means we're not robots, we're not machines, we're human beings created with a soul, a personality. But it also means we got a free will. And if we want to abuse our free will, we can go right ahead and do it. But there will be a day of judgment when God promises to hold us responsible for the free decisions that we have made. And that's why Joshua stands before the people of Israel and says, if serving the Lord seems undesirable to you, then choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. So Genesis 1 says, God created this and God saw that it was good. And God created that and God saw that it was good. And you got to get the point, guys. When an author repeats and repeats and repeats a little phrase, obviously he's trying to get the point across. When God created, he did a good job. And that little phrase, God saw that it was good, is repeated and repeated and repeated in Genesis 1. But in Genesis chapter 3, we read how human beings rebelled against God. They didn't eat an apple, they ate some fruit. But that is symbolic of their rebellion against God. It's symbolic of sin. And why do I sin? I sin because I think I'm smarter than God and I know it'll make me happier. So I'm going to do it my way instead of God's way. Not because I'm trying to be evil. I'm not trying to be evil. I'm trying to be happy. My problem is I think I know how to make Cliff happier than God knows. And that's basically what Adam and Eve did. We know what'll make us happier. We will define good and evil. We will assume godhood. And when they made that decision, that's where the train got off the track. That's where the arrow missed the mark and things got ugly fast. Because when God steps back, chaos fills the gap. Now, what's one of the main points of the book of Job? One of the main points of the book of Job in the Old Testament is life is unfair, God is fair. Don't get the two mixed up. Life is unfair, God is fair. Do not get the two mixed up. So when you suffer, if you clench your fist and wave it at God, that's misplaced anger. Misplaced anger. It's not God who's getting you. Rather, it's you're born into a cursed, unfair, messed up world. Life hurts. And to blame God is a cop-out. The same way if I hold back, slap you in the face and then turn to you and say, God made me do it. That is a cop-out. I'm lying through my teeth to you. He gave me a free will. I am responsible for feeding you or I am responsible for slapping you. God gave me that innate ability. That's part of why I believe we have a soul. Because you see, friends, if there is no God, you don't have a free will. If there is no God, you just are a chemical reaction between your two ears. That's all you are. And determinism wins the day. Fatalism wins the day. What will be, will be. What is. No, the Bible teaches we've been created in the image of God. We have a soul. And that means a rational mind, a free will, the ability to love or to hate or to be indifferent. We choose. So we choose to rebel against God, and that's where suffering, evil, and death enter the experience of humankind. Then we go to the Gospels. And in the Gospels, what does Jesus do? He comforts. Now, what is comforting based on? It's based on presence. Presence. People comfort me by being present. People don't comfort me by preaching a sermon to me. People comfort me when they make their presence real, when they're with me. They don't have great points to make. They don't talk a lot. It is their presence that I need. The biggest comfort you and I will ever get in this life is the presence of God, the presence of Jesus Christ. Well, how on earth do you experience that? You open up your heart, you open up your life by praying, by repenting, by growing and trusting Christ, by obeying Him, by meeting with other believers, by having a church family, allowing God to speak to you through other people in small groups, in one-on-one conversations, in a worship service. And you begin to build an understanding of the presence of God. Job asked a lot of questions of God, a lot of hard questions. Finally, God comes to Job. Job chapter 38. And we got 4 chapters of God speaking to Job. Did God answer one of Job's questions? Nope. He did not answer one of Job's questions. What did he do for Job? He gave Job an overwhelming sense of his presence. And that presence of God brought tremendous comfort to Job. Oh, you stupid person. You gonna go to church every Sunday? Don't you know all the athletic events that your children could be attending Sunday morning? You're really dumb. You're hurting your child. No, you're not. You are teaching your child how to position themselves to experience the presence of God. You read the Bible every day, you pray every day, you have a quiet time? What an incredible waste of your time. Don't you know that if you were on the job, you could be making more money? Well, let me tell you why I'm going to do it. Because I want to know God better. I want to experience His presence better. Because life's going to get real rocky in your future and in my future. And the presence of God is one of the key ways that we experience comfort in this life. So yes, there's a lot of suffering. And yet Jesus Christ wants to comfort us. And He also bled and died on a cross. So if ever anybody says to you, the reason you suffer is that you don't have enough faith, isn't it sad that Jesus didn't have enough faith? Because in the Garden of Gethsemane, He prayed, Father, if it is possible, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but your will be done. Did the Father take the cup away from Jesus? Nope. Did the Father answer Jesus' prayer the way I would have liked Him or Jesus would have liked Him to do it? Nope. Jesus went straight to the cross. One of the most painful, excruciating deaths possible, death by crucifixion. But what Jesus did was, He surrendered to the Father. He said, if it is possible, take this cup from me. Yet not my will, but your will be done. Then, 3 days after He died, He rose from the dead, which means we have the ultimate solution for suffering. And that ultimate solution for suffering is not a drug high, it's not slitting your wrists, it's not hopping into bed with someone and having promiscuous sex. It's not the solution. The solution is eternal life, which begins now as we experience the presence of God, and then it continues through eternity. When Christ returns, He will give us new bodies. He's going to give my little niece, who was knocked into an early grave at the age of 7, Annie, a new body. And my brother Stuart is going to be, and his wife Mary Banks are going to be reunited with their precious little daughter. And I will get to see Annie one day. And Ed and Lisa are going to see their precious little daughter as well, Lee Beth, one day, because Lee Beth put her faith in Christ, and Ed and Lisa put their faith in Christ, and Christ promises eternal life to all who trust in Him. That's the ultimate solution. So now, my atheist agnostic friend, let's go to the hospital. Come on, my atheist agnostic friend, let's go into the room where the kid lies, whose body's being shredded by some perverse disease. Come on, my atheist agnostic friend, what is your solution? You're going to kick back and say, well, if God was all powerful and all loving, this wouldn't happen. That is such a theoretical, bogus question to focus on. The kid's dying. Let's get a little more practical. Is there a solution? No. If there is no God, there is no solution. Because if there is no God, when we die, we go to the fertilizer pit. And Adolf Hitler's in the fertilizer pit, and so is Mother Teresa in the fertilizer pit. And that's where I'm headed and you're headed if there is no God. So don't talk to me about a solution. I, as a follower of Christ, will walk to the other side of the bed, and I too will hold that child's hand and seek to comfort that child. But in Jesus Christ, we have God's ultimate solution to the very real problem of suffering, evil, and death. Forgiveness and eternal life in heaven, where there will be no more evil, injustice, unfairness, death. Revelation 21:4, He will wipe every tear from their eyes, and there'll be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order has been wiped away. Behold, all things have become new. So the bottom line question is, do you have God's solution to the very real problem of suffering and pain? Do you have Jesus Christ?
사실 이렇게 놓고 보면 조던 피터슨이 말하고자 했던 본질에 대한 이야기 역시 클리프 목사의 설명만큼 세세하고 신학적이지는 않았지만 크게 동떨어져 있던 것은 아니었습니다. 다만 이번 토론에서 피터슨 교수의 설득력이 상대적으로 약해 보인 이유는 아직 그의 신앙적 정체성이 언약의 계시나 기독교 교리에 근거한 것이 아니라 그가 오랫동안 깊이 연구해온 칼 융이나 칸트의 사상, 그리고 전체주의에 대한 공포와 같은 실존주의 철학적 관점에 훨씬 더 뿌리를 두고 있기 때문입니다. 바로 이런 이유로 정통 기독교 영성이나 교리 중심의 대화에서는 상대와 깊은 대화로 이어지기가 어려웠던 것이죠.
Do you believe in God? I don't think that's anybody's business. I think it's the most private question you could ask someone, but then I would say also, what's the right response to that? By their fruits you will know them. How's that?
Do you think there is a God?
I'm terrified that there might be, Piers. How's that? I'm not trying to be a smartass when I'm making that comment either. Like they say, it's an Old Testament saying, I believe, that the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, and that is actually about as true a statement as you could manage in such a short phrase. And people have congratulated me. I was at the Buckley Institute last night. They were congratulating me on my courage, and I think, and I said this last night, it's like, you guys don't understand. It has nothing to do with courage. I'm just afraid of different things than the people who lie. And I'm I'm afraid, for example, of what happens when you lose control of your tongue. And I said that back in 2016 when I first opposed the Canadian government. And people were, congratulating me. It's like, well, you're so brave to stand up to the government. It's like, I'm nowhere near as afraid of the government as I am of what happens when people lose control of their tongue. I studied totalitarianism since I was 13 years old, in depth. And I know what happens when people lose control of their tongue. What happens is everything goes to hell. And I mean that metaphysically. I might even mean it theologically, but you can just say, don't even bother with that.
But what's fascinating...
Let's just mean it practically.
But what's interesting, and you are the most open book of almost anyone I've ever interviewed, right to the point I asked you if you believe in God. I didn't actually know what you were going to say, but for some reason you're reluctant to say. Why are you reluctant?
Well, okay, it's not a well-posed question. It's too complicated an issue to be dealt with like that. You step into instant trap just by accepting the question. So I'll show you what I mean. So the first thing I would say is, what do you mean by believe? Like, do you think that a statement about the existence of God is something like a scientific theory? Do you think it's a list of facts? Is it a factual question? Does God exist or not? Is it a factual question like you're asking about whether a cup on a table exists or a plate on a table, an artifact in a room? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by believe? I'll stake my life on the proposition that God exists. How's that?
Well,
is that an answer? Because that's the right answer.
I would ask you, here's my supplementary. Do you ever pray?
Always.
Who do you pray to?
The spirit that protects you from hell.
But that, many people would say, is God.
Hey, sounds good to me.
하나님을 실제로 체험적으로 만난 순간부터 그저 하나님을 만났다, 지금도 그분을 알아가고 있다, 이렇게밖에 표현할 수 없게 됩니다. 그리고 사실 하나님께서는 아직 그 단계에 이르지 못한 이들과도 여전히 인격적인 방식으로 일하시며 그들의 모든 상황과 상태조차 하나님의 뜻 안에서 사용하십니다. 비록 조던 피터슨이 여전히 신앙적으로 여러 국면을 겪고 있고 현대 철학과 심리학 그리고 복음이 서로 혼합된 지점에서 세계적으로 큰 영향력을 발휘하고 있지만 역사상 전무후무한 토론의 전설을 세운 그조차 정작 기독교라는 주제 앞에서는 다소 아쉬운 모습을 보였던 것도 사실입니다. 하지만 오히려 이런 모습 덕분에 더 많은 무신론자들이 성경적 가치와 기독교 신앙에 의문을 품게 되었고 동시에 그만큼 더 많은 관심을 갖게 되었다고 볼 수도 있습니다. 무엇보다 피터슨 역시 자신의 지성이나 철학 그리고 심리학적 관점에 뿌리를 두었던 기존의 신앙적 사고에서 한 걸음 더 나아가 이제 정말로 언약 그 자체, 곧 성경의 진리와 하나님의 약속을 삶의 정체성으로 삼게 되는 계기를 맞는다면 지금까지의 모든 여정이 결국 합력하여 선을 이루는 하나님의 역사가 되지 않을까 하는 생각이 드는 참으로 기분 좋은 오후입니다. 고통과 악의 문제는 그럼에도 여전히 괴롭고 힘든 일이지만 말씀과 기도 그리고 공동체를 통해 안아주시는 주님 곁에 우리가 함께한다면 이 모든 것을 넉넉히 이길 것을 믿으며 오늘 하루도 기도와 예배로 찬양하고자 하는 저런 사람은 유튜브 읽어주는
If we take the Bible, Old Testament and New Testament, both, this God creature, or this Judeo-Christian God, is not someone that I would want to have a relationship with. Someone that destroys entire cities because there are people that he disagrees with, because they are or they are whatever it happens to be. That's not someone that I would want to associate with. If there was someone that was here today that thought those same kind of things, I would disassociate with him entirely.
Where does the Bible say that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah just because of their practice?
He destroyed them because he couldn't find a single or 50 or whatever it was people that weren't sinners or that weren't.
It's unfortunate then if you're going to tell me that you don't like the God of the Bible if you've not read it. I can promise you Sodom and Gomorrah were not destroyed simply because there was some practicing homosexuality.
What was it destroyed for?
There was earring going on as well.
So everyone in the city, everyone in an entire city was guilty of that.
No, but an incredibly high percentage of that population was doing incredible evil.
I find that really difficult to believe that a majority of a population would be acting violently towards other members in society, because the society would fall to pieces that quickly.
What's ISIS doing?
Sure, and they're destroying and wreaking havoc on a community, on a large community.
So what is your emotional and intellectual response to ISIS? You get angry?
As anyone else would, sure. If
is that anger contradicting your love, or is that anger because you love?
I think it's because I'm an ethical person.
Good. Bravo. I get angry if someone pulls a knife on you and seeks to destroy your life. Why do I get angry with them? Because I love you and respect you, and I'm convinced you have innate value, and therefore if anybody tries to knife you, I'm going to be angry with them. So angry I'm going to try and physically stop them.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
So love means you get involved. And you get angry if you watch people destroying other people. If I watch you get knifed and ask, what am I having for dinner? I don't give a rip about you. I'm so self-absorbed, I'm just into my dinner. God gets angry about evil because evil is the destruction of other people. And I sure hope that when you are confronted by people destroying people, you don't ask what you're having for dinner. Instead, you get angry. And then you seek to harness that anger and do something constructive to prevent the slaughter of innocent people.